Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Friday Law Talk for the month of October. I'm Ashleigh Gardner-Cormier. I'm the social worker for the Crime Victims Unit with Lone Star Legal Aid.
My name is Jocellyn Camarillo, and I am the Criminal Justice Coordinator for the network, which is short for the Texas Crime Victim Legal Assistance Network.
Okay, thank you, Jocellyn. And we're also really excited to have Amy Smith, the Senior Director of Operations and Communications with Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, here with us today. And before we get into the thick of things, I'd like to read a very brief disclaimer. This presentation is intended to serve as legal information and does not replace legal advice. Contact Lone Star Legal Aid at 1-800-733-8394 or go to www.lonestarlegal.org for more information on legal assistance. Lone Star Legal Aid does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, national origin, ancestry, disability, marital status, or military status in any of its activities or operations. Okay, so again, we're really excited and grateful to have Amy Smith with us here today. So Amy, I'd like to give you some space to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Amy Smith. I'm with the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, which is a really long name for our nonprofit that's been around since 1996. However, we have been a kind of an operation with full-time staff since 2010. We are a nonprofit that is working to hold offenders accountable and make services more accessible to victims. We do that through several different projects that we have. One of them is we help facilitate and coordinate rapid rehousing for domestic violence survivors through the coordinated access, which is with all of our community partners. We also facilitate two domestic violence high-risk teams, which are geared toward helping high-risk cases navigate the criminal justice system, as well as making sure that they have victim services that are available. We also work on policies. We have a legal services committee that does training. We have a training committee that does lots of training for lots of different organizations. So that's kind of what we do in a nutshell. We're not really a direct service organization, but we can direct you to the appropriate people to get the help that you need.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Amy. And in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, today's topic is leaving an abusive relationship and who can help at each stage. And given the type of organization that Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council is, I think it's so fitting that we have you here with us today. And we chose this topic specifically because in our experience working in the Crime Victims Unit, we know that domestic violence and the help that you need to escape the situation is not one size fits all. You know, we get clients and they're just at different phases, you know, of deciding to leave or actually leaving. There's moving parts, there's kids. It's never simple. And so it's just important. We know it's important for people to know where to go depending on where they are in the process of leaving or deciding to leave. So again, thank you for being here. And Jocellyn, I'm gonna have you take it away.
Yeah, so I'm going to kick it off. You answered, I think, my first question, which was to kind of let us know a little bit about the Harris County Domestic Violence Council. So I'm just going to jump into the second question here that I have for you. And kind of like Ashleigh was saying, you know, us as professionals in the field, we kind of know that domestic violence takes on different forms, right? And so my question to you is, what would you say are some of the telltale signs that someone may not know of, but are in fact forms of domestic violence?
Well, domestic violence is when people think about domestic violence, they think of actual physical violence, but domestic violence is really about power and control. Kind of what we go on is what we call it's a power and control wheel that was first created up in Minnesota by Ellen Pence, who is kind of like the godmother of the domestic violence movement. And basically what she did was she got 150 women together and asked them, the question that everybody asks a domestic violence survivor: why don't you leave? And so they filled out Post-it notes and they put it all over her office. And basically it came down to about 8 different tactics as to why women stay. And just really briefly, a lot of it is, it starts with intimidation and threats. And then it can go into financial abuse. Not just, it could be where one partner has control of all the money, so the other partner doesn't have access to anything to leave. It could be that one partner is ruining the credit of the other partner, so there's no way that if they did leave that they could get access to housing or anything like that. And then you have using the children, meaning, hey, if you leave, you can leave me, but you're not going to take my kids with me. Or or I'm going to report to CPS that you're a bad mother. And so then you have those kind of tactics. And then there's also emotional abuse, which is actually what I like to say is like the worst kind of abuse, because it doesn't leave a mark, but it leaves marks on the inside. And sometimes that's the hardest one to get over, by telling the person that's supposed to love you most that you're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid, nobody's going to want you. If you leave me, nobody else is going to want you. So again, it's the emotional abuse. It's kind of like how I like to describe it is when you get that paper cut and you look down and, you just feel like blood should be spurting out because it hurts so bad and there's nothing, but that's kind of what like emotional abuse is. And so sometimes that's really hard to heal from that. But again, there's no, hitting, punching, slapping, kicking, or strangling. It's all just tactics of power and control. And then you have minimizing, denying, and blaming, meaning that, what I'm doing is not bad. I mean, or, I wouldn't have to do this if it wasn't your fault, or just like, I didn't hit you, so this isn't abuse. And then of course there's just coercion and threats, which mean, if you leave me, I'm going to kill you. If you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. If you leave me, I'm going to kill, your family members. And so you take all those into consideration, and that kind of makes someone want to stay. And so if you start recognizing these signs, then you can realize that you might be in a domestic violence situation. But what we have found is that a lot of folks grow up in a situation like this, and they don't understand what a healthy relationship is. So what we do with a lot of our trainings is we always start off with talking about what is a healthy relationship. And that way you can know what it is, because if you've never known anything else, then that's what you're going to think is normal. And so it's really important to talk to people about a healthy relationship, about how, you're not afraid to state your own opinion. It's okay to spend money on things that you want to spend money on. And you shouldn't feel threatened in your house.
Okay, good. That's good information. So if someone's kind of listening to you and they're kind of realizing that they may have those red flags in their relationship or in their home, and so at this point they know that they're in an unhealthy relationship, but they're not quite ready to leave yet, right? Do you or do domestic violence shelters have services that are tailored to fit the needs of individuals who are in that particular space where they know they're in an unhealthy relationship, but they're not quite ready to leave yet?
Yes. One of the most important things too, and what you also have to realize, is that leaving is the most dangerous time, because the abuser is losing power and control. And if you listen to all the news that we have been hearing especially over the last couple of years, it's always like ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend, they were in the process of leaving, they were exchanging children. But that's always the most dangerous time. So all any domestic violence service professional will sit down with someone and talk about a safety plan. And they talk about a safety plan for when you stay or when you leave. And there's two different things. And so like some of the things you do when you leave, when you're getting ready to leave, or you're not quite there yet, is to talk about, okay, do you know where all your important documents are? Do you have copies of your children's important documents? Are they in a safe place? Have you been able to save any type of money where he doesn't have access to it? Think about maybe getting another phone that he doesn't know about, he doesn't have access to, just talking to people that he doesn't necessarily know that might be where you go. But look and talk to any of our domestic violence partners. They have what they call non-residential services. And that would be, you'll talk to them, there'll be safety planning. There's, talking to someone about what the legal options are as well. And then they can help you decide, hey, this might not be the best time because it's where you're at. The only person that is an expert on your relationship and on you is yourself. So I can't tell you, hey, this is what you need to do. You need to decide what this is going to be. And what else is really important to remember is the strongest people that I have ever met are domestic violence survivors, because they did whatever had to do to survive. So what that means is they knew what to do, and they knew what the triggers were. So they were going to make sure that they could survive that. So if it's staying to finish out a degree, if it's staying to save money, if it's staying until there's a place that's open up for a housing place, then it's okay to do that, because it's what's best for you at the time that's going to keep you and your children safe.
Okay. And kind of along those same lines, when a victim is ready to make that plan, that safety plan to escape and to get out safely, what are some of those resources, or who can help them kind of put that plan in place and kind of know what the next steps are or what they need to do to leave that abusive situation?
Well, there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline, which is 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-799-7233. And that's a 24-hour hotline. And if you call that number, it can get you access to the closest women's center in your area. And so make the call to that hotline, the domestic violence hotline. They can also help you with a safety plan, or they can help you find a place that's closer to you, that if you want to go in and talk to someone and just see what some of the services are. There are a lot of things that you need to, like I said, you need to take into consideration. Not everybody wants to leave, and not everybody wants to go to a shelter. There are some people that have a place to go, a place to stay. So just take what is important and think about what you can do and what resources that are out there. But it's always nice to talk to a professional just to kind of figure out what you can and can't take. And one of the great things about the network is having information about those services that are available for our internal partners that can know, okay, this shelter's full, but this one might have some space. This one's not taking any clients, or here's some back story of that. So that's what's one thing that's really great about y'all's network.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to take up all the time. Ashleigh, do you have a couple questions that you'd like to ask her?
I do. But before I ask any questions, I just want to say one thing that stuck out to me while you were talking was the safety plan for if you stay or if you leave. Because I think so many times, not even necessarily on our part as the service providers, but when I speak with clients, it's their assumption that I'm going to tell them to leave immediately, and sometimes I have to stop them and say, like you said, you're the expert in your situation. And realistically, I could tell you, oh, you need to go right now, but that's not necessarily what you're going to do. So let's, I always try to meet them where they are, because sometimes it's not the best thing to do in that moment. And so just thank you for expounding on that. I appreciate that. I think it'd be really helpful for anybody who's watching.
And when you talk about a safety plan for when you stay, it's things like what room not to get trapped in. Is there a back door? I would not say, like, if an argument starts, that you head to the kitchen, because there's lots of weapons in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Is there a safe place in your home that you can go to, lock yourself in, take a cell phone, take a landline or something like that? So just realistically looking at where in your place would be safe, or have a safe, what we like to say is a safe word or a safe code with a neighbor. Is it like, hey, if you see, a red dish towel hanging in my front window, that means, call the police, or, and then make sure also that you have a safety plan for each of your children, and that those kids know what that safety plan is. It's kind of like, the old fashioned fire drill. You need to make sure that you are, that you're executing it, and that your kids know what to do and where to go and who to go to and who that they can trust as well, to help let them get help too. And that's really important. And then the most important thing too to think about too is what about your alcohol or drug intake? I mean, because we all know that we don't make good decisions when we've been drinking or we've been doing drugs. And so to make sure that you're aware of that as well. And so, and in the midst of a situation, you're going to want to remember these things, and it's best to make sure that you practice and know where everything is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So another question. When a victim is ready, and they need help, sometimes that moment doesn't come between the hours of 9 to 5. And so for our listeners, if it is 11 o'clock or even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, are there agencies available to help them, outside of normal business hours?
There are all of the shelters in our area, the domestic violence shelters, which are the Houston Area Women's Center, the Bridge in Pasadena, Bay Area Turning Point in Webster, Family Time in Humble, all have shelters that are available. And they also have 24-hour hotlines. So you can call the hotline. And if there's space available, then yes, you can, go in the middle of the night. Or if there's not space, some of the programs have some money, not a whole lot, but some money for like a hotel for the night. Or, I know like our friends at the Bridge have a partnership with law enforcement that they won't ever turn away anyone that a law enforcement brings. So, so there's some shelters that have that. So yes, no matter, because we know, I can guarantee you, I'll tell you what time, at 5 o'clock on a Friday, someone's going to call with an issue or with a problem, because it never fails.
Yes.
And so, yes, there are services that are out there. And then the Houston Police Department also has their DART program, which is their domestic violence response team that works on the weekends, in the evenings, in the middle of the night, during the weekends. And so, calling 911 can also trigger a DART response, which would be an officer and an advocate. And that advocate from the police department can help make those decisions at 2 o'clock in the morning. So.
Okay, thank you. That's great information. I know some people just have different assumptions, about what resources are available, if they can be helped, how they can be helped. And I just wanted to make sure that information was out there. Another thing that's really important, or we felt was really important to ask, was about when somebody seeks help with escaping a domestic violence situation. Does it matter if they're a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, if they're a man, if they're a minor, and what are some of the resources that are available to them if they do meet some of this criteria?
all the women's centers help anybody. There are some that are set up to handle and to take in men. Some of them use their hotel program, or some of them have a room set aside for male survivors. The LGBTQ plus community, their best resource is the Montrose Center. The Montrose Center also has a domestic violence program, and also they have access to housing as well. So they are available to help. And again, they have a really robust domestic violence situation. Now, minors are a little bit tricky, depending on the age of the minor. A lot of it is going to depend on the age and who the perpetrators are. If it's if it's a parent and they're under the age of 17, then that might be that might involve CPS. If they're 17 and it's a boyfriend or a girlfriend, then that might be a little bit different. And then they can still contact the women's centers, and they can help them figure out the best route for them as well.
Okay, thank you. I did have another question I wanted to ask, and this is just a question as a part of, being a part of your organization. I'm sure you have more of a bird's eye view of the situation than we would. And I know we've noticed upticks in certain areas because of the pandemic and the economy and things like that. And so I wanted to know if within your organization, you all had noticed that there was an increase in the prevalence of domestic violence related to the pandemic and the economy, changes in the economy recently.
Well, actually, yes, we have noticed that. At the beginning of the pandemic, we began meeting on a weekly basis with family violence investigators from the Houston Police Department, the Harris County Sheriff's Office, and the Pasadena Police Department, as well as the District Attorney's Office, just to kind of monitor the situations during the pandemic. What we thought was going to be something at the very beginning of the pandemic, there were not a whole lot of calls to police, mainly because I think there were a lot of factors involved. I think some people were too scared to call. Anecdotally, we know that like the number of calls to a hotline went up during the middle of the night, because you realize that during the pandemic that people were stuck together and they couldn't get away. And so, and not only were they stuck together, they were stuck in with their kids as well. And so it made it a very difficult situation. But once things started opening up a little bit, then there was just a lot of calls. And what we discovered were that the calls became a lot more violent, and the injuries were a lot more severe. And, we don't know if that's because that was the time that they called for help. And, there were minor assaults and other times they just didn't feel that they could call the police. But what we also did is we received money from Harris County, and we contracted with UTMB to do a healthy relationship study. And it was Dr. Leela Woods was the primary investigator on that. And what we found during that was that, yes, there was a huge uptick in domestic violence during the pandemic. They interviewed domestic violence survivors, and they interviewed batterers. And what they found was that there was an increase in domestic violence. In some cases, the domestic violence started during the pandemic, but most of the time it increased during the pandemic. And what was there was a very limited number of resources, mainly because of COVID-related issues. The shelters reduced their capacity for social distancing, and made it more difficult. At one point, the Houston Area Women's Center was operating 3 different shelters. They had 2 at hotels. They had 1 at their space, mainly because it's trying to get everybody out. And then you had a COVID shelter. So it made it very difficult. And then on top of everything else, you had the economy. We also, at the same time, of course, we're dealing with all the racial unrest around the George Floyd murder. And so calling the police in some communities was not the ideal situation. So they didn't. So that's kind of how things got skewed. Everything is like up, but what you also have to understand too is that Houston has not been normal, and I use that word normal, since 2017. So we had Harvey, and Harvey knocked out our criminal justice center because it flooded, and so we were dealing with Harvey, and it's a known phenomenon that after a natural disaster, domestic violence is going to rise because of all the pressure surrounding it. We had Harvey, we were just getting over Harvey, and then COVID hit. So when you look at the numbers in Harris County, we haven't had a normal year since 2017. So it makes it difficult. So when you look at the numbers, you can see that they've gone up, but they've really gone up since 2017. So what we do know is that Houston is a fabulous city that has so many resources. It's rich in resources, but there's not enough of them. So absolutely. That and y'all know that as well. I mean, we refer lots of people to y'all, and I'm sure y'all with deal with the evictions, with just all sorts of different issues. The other thing that survey found was that there were a lot of people that were either unemployed, but they as a result of the pandemic, or they were underemployed, meaning that a lot of them had jobs in the service industry, their hours were cut, and they lost their job. And the thing that really helped were the relief money that came in. That relief was a godsend. And then Harris County also created the Domestic Violence Assistance Fund. And so we were able to also distribute that money to some of the clients that in the domestic violence clients, not just our agency, but all agencies. And that allowed them, again, some funds to either, pay back rent, stay in stay where they are, get their car fixed, maybe going to school, upgrading their internet, buying computers for their kids, things like that. So that was like a huge godsend for that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Like I said, we wanted to do this particular topic just to kind of talk about what's out there, because I think, some people, they may never call, but we want to make sure we get the information to them. So, Jocellyn, is there anything you wanted to add?
I just want to say thank you again, Amy, for the information. Our goal really is to just get the information out there and make sure that whoever, sees it, whoever listens, just knows that there are resources. There's a team, there's you guys, there's us, there's law enforcement. You talked about the shelters, the 24/7. So there is help, and it sounds like at all times, right? So again, just thank you for joining us and for the information and for really elaborating on everything. So appreciate what you do.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you for doing this.
Absolutely.
Because, like you said, it's really important. So thank you.